Okay, Grandma.
Why do we have that lamp there?
Just to help light a little bit. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Do you not like it?
Well, it's sort of funny on the end of an end table. Like that.
Woo. Yeah, I mean, we can. Okay, just for. So if they find this tape in 200 years, they have no idea who we are. What is your name again, Grandma?
Helen Otocka.
Okay. And it's 17th of January, 2015 now. It's crazy.
Right. Oh, so,
So you're not helping me. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Where were you born, Grandma?
Binghamton, New York.
Yes. Can you tell us a little about your mom and dad? Where they came from, what they did?
Well, my father, I think, came from an area which is now Poland, but everybody was born in Austria-Hungary in those days. So when I went to school, I had to say that my parents came from Austria-Hungary. And my father's definitely had a different accent than my mother. So a dialect that was different than hers. So he didn't come from the same area, but from the same country. And she came from Polish Czechoslovakia. And she came from a family that had their own farm and did their own, had their own people working, had people working for them. They were a little more successful than some. And I don't know really how to say that, except that Grandma was kind of a businesswoman, and she saw that they would, that crops were harvested, and I think she was sort of the brains of the outfit and ran the farm.
Yeah, this was
She also raised horses, which she sold to the Army, and that has a little link to for my mother's future, because my mother used to go with my grandmother to the fort, which is not very far from their home, and they would sell these horses. Not that she grew a lot of them, you know, she'd have maybe, I really don't know how many, but would have a few, and she would go up and sell them to the people at the fort. But in order to cinch the deal, she had to get on a train and go to Austria, or Hungary, Austria, to finish the deal. And they would get on the train and go together, and it was a great event because the mother would get to shop with her mother in Austria. And Mother had one of her best friends was Rose. I'm trying to think of the last name. Her name. She was our godmother for all the kids in our family. And I do know her maiden name. I'm trying to think of it. Rose. Well, anyway, Rose's parents, Mother, did the laundry for the Army, for the officers in the Army. And so she would have to deliver the clean laundry to the fort or go pick it up sometimes. And my mother owned a white stallion that nobody else could really touch or work with them or ride with them or anything, because he only accepted my mother as a good friend, I guess. So they would take the laundry back on the horse, but Rose couldn't touch that horse. My mother had to do it. And she could ride with her, but she could not go anywhere near it or try to get on it by herself, maybe, because that horse wouldn't accept anybody. It was a big, white, beautiful stallion, and they would go up to that fort. Well, on every Sunday in Holich, they had a bandstand in the middle of town, and they had the soldiers would come down, and they had a dance going in the middle of this little town square. And that's how my mother met my father, and started to see him there quite often on Sundays.
Was he in the service?
And he was in the service. When my grandmother, that particular year, my grandmother and grandfather came to the United States more to visit and to see it all. No intentions of really staying, but they didn't take the two girls. My mother had a sister. And they were home and stayed on their head in Hullage. So when my grandmother got a letter from Europe that my mother was seeing my father, she sent for the girls. And she thought, well, she put a stop to that because she was kind of dictatorial and she figured she was going to kind of put things together, not my mother by herself. So anyway.
Do you know, like, roughly what time, like what years?
No, that I couldn't tell you. It had to be late 1800s because my mother came here, I think it would be in there around 1889, I would say, or 98, 1898 maybe. She was married to my father in 1905. And her first son was born in 1907. But while they were here in America visiting, my grandfather, I guess they decided to stay, but my grandfather became ill. And they lived here for a few years, and he was, this is the little things that I remember. I was just a young girl when my father died, but the stories that I remember being told, that they actually got ahead by selling property. They'd go from one house to another and sell that and then better themselves each time. And I could almost show you some of these properties because I do know where they were. And when they lived, when Grandma and my mother were doing laundry one day when my father appeared, he was looking for her. He knew that she came to the United States and he was trying to find her. And he ended up working in Auburn in a comb factory. But he kept asking and asking about his family, and finally he got told where they were. And so he came to Binghamton and walked in on them while they were doing laundry in the backyard. I don't know why that stays with me with that. I don't know. My mother said we were doing laundry, she and her mother, in the backyard. And he came. So they got together, of course, and eventually married. And as I say, they were married in 1905 in St. Patrick's Church in Binghamton.
Okay.
Because I think St. Cyril's was being built in that year because it opened in 1905, but it wasn't ready for them to be married in. So that's basically the things that I remember about them coming to this country.
We have it down, but just so we have it on the, when were you born?
1925. Uncle Steve was born in 1920. So the last two kids were much later, because my Uncle Nick was born in 1907.
And he's the oldest?
He was the oldest one.
And how many? You were one of 7?
Mm-hmm. My brother, Nicholas, and then Henry, Alex, Stacia, Steve, and I.
What was it like growing up? Like when was your father still? He wasn't still working in the comb factory because he wasn't in Auburn anymore.
No. He worked, I know, for some time, a few years in the furniture store in Binghamton, which was a big furniture store. It's along the river, and in fact the building is just being renovated now. And I know that he worked there for a while because there were evidences of china and glass in our house that he bought, and they got gifts from the boss. And so I know that that's one place that he worked, and then eventually must have gone to Endicott Johnson, but they lived in several different homes before they built the store. And they built the store, I was actually the only one that was born in that location. I mean, while the store was being established, and coming about. Let me think.
How was it growing up in that store? Like, I mean, you helped out and
Well,
all
I
that?
was a little girl, of course, and it was our social place. So we met people there, and it was every evening. It was a place where everybody gathered, and they had men would sit around, and they all came from Czechoslovakia or Austria-Hungary, as I said. And they would talk and tell all these tales about the old country, and they would just discuss politics. And
what kind of store was it?
it was a grocery store, and it was the only one in the neighborhood. There was only one larger store around, and that was called an A&P, which was a chain. And there weren't many of those around either. So she was in a pretty good location because, as I say, there was very few stores around. And almost everybody in the neighborhood worked in Endicott Johnson or in Dunn's McCarthy. They were also a shoe manufacturer. And everybody on their way home from work would stop and buy groceries or things that they needed, or come back after dinner and buy cold cuts to make their sandwiches for the next day for work. And it was almost a routine, some of these people, you know. And as the economy got better and more people moved into the neighborhood, the products in the store expanded. You know, we had more merchandise and more stock. And my mother really ran the store full time because my father went to work in Endicott Johnson because my brother was in college and was going to go to medical school. Or did go to medical school because I think he graduated in the early 30s. So, and I was born there, so that was in 1925, and he in the early 30s. I'm sure the records are there.
It must have been pretty interesting growing up.
It was a very interesting place to grow up, yes, and to hear all the tales from all the other people. In the evening, before the crowd gathered in the back of the store to sit, it was really a Cracker Barrel place almost, you know, people all sat around there and he would drink a beer or something, and smoke their cigars. And Uncle Steve and I would be climbing the boxes which were stored in the back of the store, which are the merchandise, you know, that came in that was put on the shelves, yeah. But before the crowd came, Grandpa would be sitting there, and my father would be sitting in the store trying to read the paper while we were running around or making a lot of noise. But he would tell us tales, wonderful stories. We loved that part when he would give us all these folk tales. I wish I could remember some of them, but I remember we couldn't wait for the next episode if we didn't get finished the first night, you know.
Did he talk to you in English or Slovak?
In Slovak. Mm-hmm. You know, and probably that's why we became pretty fluent in Slovak. I can't think of anything else that wouldn't be of real interest to you. This store, my mother carried most everybody that worked in Endicott Johnson had a little orange book, and they had credit. And every week on payday, they'd come through this open field that was on the other side of our store, stop in and pay their bill. And my mother would always give them a treat, something to take home for that night to have. Because they'd leave a pretty good size part of the check there, because that was probably the only place that they really did any shopping. Eventually, Endicott Johnson had a market in Johnson City, a farmer's market, and of course people got their stuff from locally grown stuff there. There were some crafts being shown there, as I remember.
I remember you telling me some story about like large amounts of sugar being sold.
Well, it was Prohibition years, and people were making moonshine at home, and of course they had to have sugar for that and some kind of fruit. So my mother would order cases of prunes for some of these people, and bags of sugar, and they would be stored in the back of the store. And some night, then my brothers would get the car out and deliver these 100-pound bags of sugar, which would be like 3 or 4 bags of that, and several cases of the dried prunes, which came in a wooden crate. And that would be done at night because nobody was supposed to know that these people were brewing it. But as I look back now, almost everyone that had a really nice place, and a nice home, and had a little extra cash were brewing it at home. Where they actually sold it and everything, I couldn't say for sure. But that was the part that my people participated in, selling that, getting hold of all this sugar and prunes and stuff to sell to them. But eventually that stopped because Prohibition, came. I don't know what year exactly.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
But yeah, I remember that. That was like kind of a fun night, getting all that sugar out of there and all those crates of prunes. We did sell things to make beer, and the only reason I remember that is that one night Uncle Henry got this bug that on top of this refrigerator in the store we had hops. Actually, it was a shelf. It was not in the refrigerator. The big refrigerator wasn't there then. And they all wanted to experiment and make hops one night. And I got this big brass oval-shaped container, and they were brewing this beer. That's the first time I'd ever seen it done or anything. But Aunt Rose was in on that. She taught. She kind of knew some of that, how to do that and what to do. But once that hops was gone, it was never replaced because, all that stuff came on the market. It was already, Prohibition was over.
So you and Uncle Steve were separated by quite a few years from the rest of your siblings?
Right.
Were you two partners in crime?
1907, and he was always correcting me and, trying to make me be a big girl. And my brothers played a big part in getting me ready for bed and everything because my mother ran the business till about 10 o'clock at night, morning till night, kept it open because those guys were hanging around. They'd start breaking up maybe about 9:30 or so. And by then I would be in bed, of course. But I often heard them coming upstairs. And when we closed the business, my mother and father, and my father, one thing I remember distinctly is that we had a long hall, just like one I have here. And he would pray every night walking up and down that hall. And he had a very bad breathing condition because he was asthmatic. And I kind of missed that when he passed away, even as I was 10, 11 years old, so when he passed. So I used to kind of miss that, listening to that breathing and his mumbling and praying up and down. And I think that his life, religious life, came because they were very poor farmers. He came from a very poor area, and his mother died at his birth, is what I understand. And eventually his father married, and he thought the world of his stepmother. She was wonderful to him. He always said the most wonderful things about her. But they were poor, and there was an uncle in the family that was a priest. And he was being sent to South America, a place called St. Joseph's, Argentina. This is on the Climo side. And my father was a teenager then, and he decided to take him with him because there'd be one less family, one less to feed up there. So he went to live in this St. Joseph's, Argentina with his uncle. But he had to return to Austria because they had conscription, and he had to put his time in the army. And that's the connection between Holich and my mother and
Mhm.
my father being sent up there to, he was like an aide, I think, to the officer, some officer there. Let me think what else I know about that.
Yeah, and just so there's no question, it's all like Roman Catholic
Oh,
in
yeah,
the family on both sides.
both sides. Now, maybe on my father's side, they might have been like, being more like a Greek Catholic, but it was definitely under the Pope.
Okay.
And in our family history, I don't know if you ever remove it, why we left the church or why we became Presbyterian. My father never really practiced going to church, but he was a very religious man. But after they left, after Steve was born, and they planned the baptism, they were using the same godparents, and Mr. and Mrs. Sisak. And Mr. Sisak went back to Czechoslovakia when Steve's baptism was to occur. But his son was going to be the proxy. And they planned all this festivities, baked all this food, and baked all the cookies and made all the food and everything. And when they got to the church, the priest refused to baptize him because he didn't think the godfather was worthy of being the godfather to all of us, because there was some gossip about him receiving some kind of publications that were not good, not communistic in those. I think they call it Bolshevists at that time or something. I don't know. That's the story I heard. Now, I was a kid. I picked up a lot of this. And so my father said, well, you're not going to do it. I'm going to go to my friend, the Polish priest. And the priest said, yes, come, we'll baptize him. And when he got up there, he refused to do it because that priest had called the other one and told him not to do it. And the reason my father was confident that he could get that done in the Polish church, because he helped lay the cornerstone, I understand, in the Polish church. Because he was, businessman and everything. Probably made contributions to that, because he belonged to that society till the day he died, the Polish Men's Society up there on Prospect Street in the Polish church. So Steve was never really baptized then until he was 7 years old, and then he was baptized in the Methodist church. Because a young couple, a young minister and his wife with his 3 children came to Binghamton, and they were very active, and they did a lot for the kids in the community, and especially in that neighborhood where the store was located. And they built what is now a big hardware store, but it was called Wesley Hall. It was a gymnasium, and they had teens playing, and he had everybody doing something. They were a very, very active church with the youth. And our people didn't go there because most of them were Catholic and went to St. Cyril's. When I say our people, our Slovak people in the neighborhood. And my mother kind of supported him because he took her boys. My brother, when he was in high school, I can't say much about Nick because I don't remember him even living home. I don't remember him in the house. Maybe once coming home on a break or something from school, but I was too young. I didn't remember that. And my brothers would go to camp, and they built a camp on the Johnny Ganslet Lake, and he would gather up all these kids in the neighborhood and take them with him to this camp where they learned a lot of things, wonderful things, good things, and about the Bible. And my mother would go up every Sunday. One of my brothers would drive us up. I would go too, and she would take a case of little bottles of soda and buy watermelon on the road, and she'd take things like, I remember crates of spaghetti came, wooden crates like that. They didn't come individually packaged like we get them today. You had to ask for a pound of spaghetti, and you had to go and pick it up and weigh it and wrap it up and send it out to the home whoever was buying it. But that's how Uncle Steve, how he got involved with Methodist Church, although he never really joined, but my mother did support him. And he became one of the hierarchy of the Methodist Church, this minister. And eventually, the Depression was so bad that they had to close the church, and he went to Worcester, New York. And our kids played basketball before he left. I mean, they were called the Eagles, and that was their headquarters at that church. And they were a very wonderful team, all these little kids from that neighborhood. But anyway, that's getting away from the family a little bit.
Well, no, it's all.
But that was our
Great
life.
to hear.
That was our life around that church for a while. And Stacia would go there, and we'd go to Bible school, and I went to cooking classes upstairs above that in that gymnasium. They had a kitchen.
How old were you when you did cooking classes?
Well, I think must have been like maybe 6, 7 years old, because I remember standing on a chair stirring something at a counter, you know. I vaguely remember it, but I did go there, and I remember the teacher. Her name was Mrs. Zimmerman, and she was from the West Side, kind of classy lady, and she helped out with that church very faithfully. And my brother Nick, I do remember that he was an instructor there, and they would, on the Jenny Ganslet is where the Indians used to set up their camps, you know, whatever, and they would find all these relics along the river. In fact, I got a couple of things in the safe upstairs that were found along the river from the Indians. But that was very common in those days. And the only way you could get to this place is either by car, or they would get on a train that would drop them off in Greene, New York, and they'd have to walk to the Jenny Ganslet from there, maybe a mile and a half, something. But that was our fun time. And
would that be mostly
Everyone
just during the
loved it.
summer, or is that like?
well, it was
Every
a year
weekend?
round, but of course it was a big thing in the summer. The camp was only open in the summer because there was only bunkhouses. And it was very crude inside these bunkhouses. They were actually like wooden shells. You would be assigned to one of them. And I couldn't wait to go there, but I was too young to go with my brothers and my sister. So one year I did get to go, and we had to go through a farmer's home, and through a barn, between a barn and the house, down to the Jenny Ganslet where these bunkhouses were and where their headquarters were for the camp. And I thought it was the greatest thing in the world until I had to go to bed at night. And then I was scared to death of the funny sounds and the howling and all that sort of thing. And I thought, why did I think this was so great? And all I could see was this image of a cow in the window, because we had to go through this cow field to get there. I was scared to death.
How long would you stay there? Like for a week at a time?
Well, that
or
time it was only overnight.
over one.
Yeah, but they would stay for a week, maybe even 2. I don't know exactly, the older ones. But it was a great part of their life, and the older ones, they learned a lot. They did a lot, so they had fun, and that was their real entertainment, I guess. They all looked forward to it, and the kids who came from some of the Catholic families, there's a little question there, should they be allowed to go? But the minister accepted anybody, I mean the parents wondering if anybody's looking over their shoulder, but it worked out beautifully. And he was missed when he was moved out. And my brothers helped move him to Worcester, where he took over that it's a beautiful little stone church, right up near Oneonta area. So what else can I warn you about?
What was how was school for you when, like, early school? Do you have any favorite subjects or anything like that?
Well, I went to Woodrow Wilson School. That was new, and I wasn't the greatest scholar. but I got along, and all my brothers, my older brothers, and my sister went to. There was a Clinton Street school, which is almost across the street from where Owen's furniture store was, which is now closed. And I remember them talking about it, and I was always very curious about that building because it didn't look like a school at all. But they went there to school, and I'm sure my brother Nick went there. And that actually, for a while, they lived down in that neighborhood behind St. Cyril's Church. They had a couple of different houses that they lived in. And my father bought and sold. That's how he got ahead. These houses, I think. And each time improved himself, you know. Well, my sister went to Jarvis Street School, which is closer to the store where we lived. But she, that one he went to like 6th grade or something like that. And it was still established when I started school. It was still going there, but then eventually that closed and everybody went to Woodrow Wilson or Daniel Dickinson. I don't know what was built first, Daniel or Wilson or what, but Wilson was pretty new when I went there. And then from there I went to, they had a junior high, and from there I went to Binghamton Central High School.
What were you like as a kid? Like, when you said school wasn't, you know, you weren't that crazy about school. What did you look forward to going home and, you know,
Going
doing any
home,
sports
and
or
we
like
hung,
playing
well,
any?
when I got home, I usually hung around the store and did things around the store for my mother. You know, line the cans up on the shelves and stuff like that. But actually, I can't think that we just played with the kids in the neighborhood. And I remember playing tag at night, and I remember one time we used to have milk bottles on their porches. People, because the milkman knew that, you know, 2 bottles, and I'll leave 2 bottles and take the 2 empty ones. And I remember one of them got knocked off and broken, and I got punished for that, even though I didn't do it because somebody else broke the neighbor's bottles on his porch. But we had a little park, and the same woman came every year to supervise in the summer. There was nothing there but shooty shoot and swings, and maybe one of those long, small roll things that went around in a circle. We had a sort of pump and do that. But it was very meager, but it took us off the street and we played there, and we did crafts in the summer. They had a couple of women that came around to these different little parks and neighborhoods and taught crafts. So we got in on that, and that was fun.
You said you went to the Sokol school?
And every Tuesday night I went to the Sokol Hall to the gymnastic classes. And we learned to march and do calisthenics and high bars and low bars, and you know, I can't even think in the what do you call those? Come down.
Like the ring?
The rings. We did all that.
Was it
And
mostly?
every July they'd have a big fair up at the Beestrax farm, and we would demonstrate what we learned and have a really nice program. And of course the big show is when these adult men would get up there and do all that stuff on those high bars. They were terrific. And
Was that a part of the heritage from the old country?
yes, yes.
So it was mostly at this gymnastics. It was mostly people from Slovak.
Right. There was also a Catholic Slovak Catholic gymnastics union too, but they were one was run by the church and this was independent. I'm trying to think of the man who organized this in Europe. I can't think of what his name was, but there's a university named for him in Czechoslovakia.
So how were you? How would you describe yourself when you were kind of growing up a little bit more, like junior high, high school, kind of?
Well, we were pretty, things were pretty strict. We were in every night or played in the neighborhood at night when the weather was good, but the only thing I remember doing anything different was if I didn't go somewhere with my parents or with my mother. My father was gone. One had to stay home and run the business anyway. We went somewhere visiting a relative or something, and that would be Sunday with my mother and my grandmother. I would go to a movie as I got older, Sunday afternoon movie. Kids would walk up for 10 cents. We'd go to see a movie at the Suburban Theater or the Sun Theater, which was, kind of in our neighborhood.
What was the first movie you remember seeing, or your favorite movie, or any? Do you remember any in particular?
No, I don't remember any particular one. We look forward to that on Sundays to go, and we would be there for the 2 o'clock matinee. And,
Did you have a telephone at your house?
Oh yes, we were the only ones that had a telephone in the neighborhood for a long time. There was one other family, I think they had teenage girls, but many times that phone was taken out of their home because they couldn't afford the bill. So the company would cut it off, But we had the phone, and I ran up and down the street calling people to the phone because they had a phone call, to the doctor's office or something. Being a hardware and a toy store, if I can remember. It was always very organized. And I remember getting toys like Stout. She would buy them for me, and I thought that was great because I didn't have a lot of those toys. And I remember Uncle Steve getting a big airplane. It was gray, big wings. It was about so big. And that was wonderful. He just loved that.
Tin or wooden?
It was a metal of some kind.
Yeah.
And I got a stove. I thought that was really something. It had 2 burners on it and a doll. And I thought Aunt Rose is just the greatest thing on Santa Claus didn't even match her. It was so wonderful. I guess she was so generous. She loved kids, and she did a lot for me and for Uncle Steve. She was good to us. And at this farmer's market, they often sold clothes. And I remember her bringing me a beautiful ruffled dress from there, and I thought that was great because it was really pretty, and it was very thoughtful of her to do that. I don't remember that the boys conflicted very much. Once in a while they had an argument, but not very much. A lot of card playing was done in the back of the store. We played cards, and one of the games was, I think, Casino or something like that. And I remember I learned to play that game. Got pretty good at it. And that was a lot of entertainment. And of course we listened to the radio, and clustered around the radio and listened to that. Yeah. And I went to, eventually had a girlfriend, and she talked me into going to her church, which is John Huss Presbyterian Church. And she had her brother pick me up on Sunday morning, so I would go with her. And that's basically how we got to go to John Huss Church, was through her getting me to come. And then Anastasia started getting in there, and she taught Sunday school there. And they had a lot of activities for kids, and we would go to all those things. They went to Slovak classes there, and the minister held them. He was Slovak. And that was every Saturday. We looked forward to that. And then they had a lot of penny suppers. We'd go to that at night. And, we paid a tablespoon for each, a penny for each tablespoon of food that you picked, which was sort of a covered dish. It was a covered dish. Every woman brought something. And it was a day very family-oriented. Everybody came. So that was fun. And that was my social life at that church after a while. But I was older already, maybe 10, 12 when I started going there. Yeah, and then of course, as you know, Uncle Steve and Anastasia stayed with that church. And I married Dad. When I married John in his church because I knew his parents would love that. And my parents were gone, and I figured, well, it was God who made the place, so. I went there.
What was high school like for you?
It was pretty interesting in that it was wartime, and we had a lot of assemblies in regards to patriotism and all that sort of thing, you know. And we had.
Were you if you were born in 25 and America joined the war in 42?
Mm-hmm.
So you had just started
Mm-hmm. I
high school?
graduated high school 45, in college in 49.
Oh, so you were like in like your like sophomore year when like Pearl Harbor happened and all
Right.
that.
As a matter of fact, it happened, and I didn't. As a kid, I didn't pay attention. I heard it on the radio, and people were buzzing, but I didn't think too much of it. You know, it wasn't declared war. It was the day that it happened or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to the show that afternoon. And when we were coming up from the Suburban Theater, which is a block away from the John Huss Church, we met some of the girls going to this John Huss Church. And they were like, you know, this is terrible. This is a terrible thing that happened. They were having already a service that night in that church.
Oh, wow.
And they stopped to come and go to that service. So we went to that. Yeah, and we lost about 3 boys from that particular church. 3 young men that we all knew them. Felt bad about that, of course.
Was that just at Pearl Harbor or during the war?
It was during the war. I think it was Germany. I don't remember anybody from being killed in Pearl Harbor from that particular church. That was a very sad Sunday in the end. But that made me realize how serious an event that was. And then, of course, we all listened to the president sat around the radio and listened to him talk, Roosevelt. And my brother, Nick, was in the reserves. And that summer, he had every year he had to go to a camp and, you know, put in some time. I don't know how that works now, or how many weeks or what. But he went for a few weeks to camp to fulfill his part of his duty for the reserves. And that particular year, he didn't come home when he should have come home. They kept him longer, which almost made you think that they knew something was going to brew.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that why it worked out that way, but it did, you know. And another doctor from this area was Dr. Perna. He was a dentist, and they went together. They were at Pine Camp together. And everybody was anxious for him to come home already because they had 2 little kids, Sergei and Elizabeth. And, of course, right after that, in that December, that war broke. Mm-hmm. So that was sort of a highlight in my mind. I think about that a lot. And right after that, he had to stay. He had to go into the service. So that was upsetting, of course, to everybody and my mother. And she got very sick. I can't remember exactly what year it was, but maybe he came home because she was very seriously ill, and he came home on a short leave or a weekend or something because she was in the hospital. And he, for some reason, was out on Governor's Island at that time. So he was able to get home to see her, and I think she was in a coma. And I don't know that she even knew that he was home. And then she spent, from December to maybe April in the hospital, and then came home, and maybe in June. No, didn't come home till almost June. And it wasn't maybe a little more than a month that she went back into the hospital. Spent many weeks in the hospital that particular year. She got back on her feet, but she was, not able to do the things that she did and that sort of thing. And Uncle Al had to take over the store. And that was the reason he didn't get into the service in a way he wanted to go.
Mm-hmm.
but he was deferred because my mother was ill. So he didn't get to serve in the service, and then of course eventually Uncle Steve had to go. Uncle Henry didn't go because he was already married. And I think Carol was born. But I don't know that she was, and I can't for sure tell it, but because she was married almost 10 years before they had a family, I think. That was unhappy years, because we all were waiting for news about where Uncle Nick was in the South Pacific, Uncle Steve was in Europe, in Belgium, and France too, but he was in the battle in the Bulge there. And we pick up pictures in the paper, and we think that it looked like Uncle Steve. In fact, I cut a picture out, and it was a soldier brushing, having a broom in his hand and sweeping the snow off a body. And my mother said, "Ask him if that's him," you know, because we thought it was. So I wrote, asked him in the letter if he was, it looked just like him. And he said no, but he knows exactly where that was. And he tells some wonderful tales about where he was stationed on that property, on this farmer's property in Belgium. I don't know if you know that story.
I'm not familiar, I don't think so.
Well, apparently he lived their guns were dug in on this farmer's property, and this farmer was wonderful to our soldiers. And it was bitter cold, and he'd have them come in his basement. Meanwhile, the Germans are walking around looking for his guns and stuff, you know. And this farmer's taking this big chance. And she would even feed him some stuff that she had stored in the basement, you know. And he told a story about telling her how he loved apple pie, and they didn't know what it was. He didn't speak the language, it was French, you know. But anyway, he was and she tried to make him an apple pie. He always tells that. And he would write and tell me, "You don't have to send me anything, but the girls don't have anything here because they can't go shopping. There's nothing, you know, in wartime and all." And I remember going to Fowler's department store and buying things like perfume and beautiful handkerchiefs and stuff that I didn't know what I was doing. I was just a kid, and I would send that off to him, and they thought that was wonderful. So the reason I tell this story is that when he came home, and when he got married in 1952, and he had Matt. Matt grew up, went into the service. I went into West Point, got out, was sent to Germany when he graduated. Everybody was sent somewhere to do whatever their duty was when they got out of West Point. And he went to Germany. So being that he was there, he said to his mother and father, "You should come and visit me, because, you know, I'm here now and I'm stationed here." And so they went. And my brother Steve and he rented a car, and they went back to this farmer's town. And when my brother stepped out of the car, the farmer called him by name. And that's something after all those years, it had to be 20-some years, you know.
Crazy.
And so that story was written up, I think, in whatever GI paper. I forget the name of it now.
Like the Army Times? Or?
No, it was another one. But anyway, the names weren't quite right in the paper, though, when we read the story, Steve and I. And I used to write letters to him from my mother, and Mrs. Sisak to Steve, who was also in Europe during the war, because that was his life. He was in service most of his adult life. And we were very close to that family. Wherever my mother moved, I think she moved. My mother would look up a house for him near her, and we were very good friends. She was a dressmaker. My grandmother was a sharp little thing, my mother's mother. She liked her booze. She drank. But she was wonderful to all her kids. She was independent. She had her own income and everything. And she'd tell you where to go. She was, you know, she didn't put up with much of anything. And, but everybody loved her and understood her. She did a lot for us. And I think for my mom too, I think she worried about, you know, linens and stuff in the house and made sure that my mother couldn't get out shopping, that it was done, you know, and got those things in. And she thought a bedroom needed a new bedspread, she'd go out and get it, you know. But she was always handing us a $10 bill here and there, keep us going, all us kids. And she worked in the diner in Endicott Johnson, but she was the beverage lady. And she was a little bit of a thing. And very particular how she looked. I never missed a hair appointment. That was like death, missed a hair appointment. And I remember one snowy Saturday morning when she had always standing 9 o'clock hair appointment. It was only about a block and a half away from us. We lived at the foot of a hill. And we had a very severe snowstorm one Saturday. And so she went out to the store and my brother was working and she says, well, I gotta go, we gotta go to get me to the hair. He says, nobody's going anywhere. We're not taking that car out of the garage. You cannot go today. Well, I was like, you're killing me and I'm not gonna put up with this. She snuck out the back door and we looked out and she's up halfway up the hill walking in that snow. She wasn't gonna miss that hair appointment for anything in the world. So that's the kind of determination she had. And she doctored us when we were sick because, as I say, my mother would be down in the business working. And we got that rubbed on with that whole stinking ointment that she used on us and wrapped us in flannel when we didn't feel good. Yeah, and stayed with us. She had her own room, which was kind of her own castle, and she didn't want anybody, we weren't allowed to go in that room very much unless we kind of were invited. I don't mean, you know, strict that way, but we knew that there was a line, you know, that was Grandma's privacy then. And my father would tease her about marrying my mother. I remember that, and they'd laugh. I'm trying to think of anything else that might have been fun that wouldn't be in those papers.
Mm-hmm.
There are many pictures, a few pictures I should say, of my father's family, but your mother hasn't.
Okay.
I gave them to her. As a matter of fact, my father's sister, there's a very nice portrait of her. She was a nurse. For a long time I didn't understand that they call them a sestrichka, and I didn't realize that a sestrichka does not mean just sister, it means nurse. And she was a nurse, and her husband's standing and she's sitting in a chair and she's holding a little girl. And this little girl looks exactly like Eve. Excuse me. And we could never get over that. I mean, we didn't discuss it much in front of Eve or anything, but one day the picture was out here on the pool table and Eve was a little girl and she walked in and she said, who's that woman holding me in that picture? That's how close that little girl looked. Now, I'm wondering, you know, how, I'm sure none of them are living anymore, but just what the connection is with the family that Matt met when he went over there.
Yeah.
You know, he went and visited Klimo's, and our name is exactly, we weren't sure that our name was spelled right.
Mm-hmm.
Because coming over as foreigners, we didn't know if the teacher that was taking the information got
Right.
whoever. And sometimes we saw it spelled K-L-Y, then we saw it spelled with a V on the end instead of a W.
Mm-hmm.
So when Matt went over, he clarified that and we are spelling it correctly.
Okay.
Exactly the way it was on everything there in your he did meet one little old lady. Did you hear that story?
No.
When he was over there on my father's side, it's out in the countryside, a little remote place, and she had her little farm there, and they walk through the chickens to get into the house, he and his wife. And she tried to talk with them. Of course, they didn't. They had an interpreter with them.
Okay.
That's from Belgium. So that's how they found all this so easily. And then she didn't want him to leave till the daughter came home, and they stayed and meet the daughter. So I didn't understand. And then they went back to the city or the village or whatever this was, the city, and they were very affluent. The family that he met there, that were Klingels. So that was nice to know that there's some of them there. And when he went to Holich, where my mother came from, and visited one of the older ladies there, the minute he came to the door and he tried to tell her who he was, she went back into the house and came out with the pictures of our family.
Wow.
She got it right away. She understood, I guess, that was who he was, and trying to make a connection, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was pretty interesting. When I went over there, I spent more time with John's family because it was during the communistic time. They were poor, and they were very watchful of what they did and where they went and everything. And we were not allowed to go to the church where my mother was baptized. And it was like, oh, no. And we didn't want to get anybody in trouble because they could lose their jobs and stuff, you know. So we did get to see it by ourselves after we'd left them. But that was pretty interesting because they weren't too anxious to take us to see, like, if there was anybody from my side. Oh, yeah, we do know them, you know, it's like Stalin, you know. So we didn't push for that. And I went to see one family, one woman that my grandmother brought over from Europe. And her name was Eva Jabonik. And I thought she was the most beautiful lady from the picture I'd seen of her. And I asked about her and I wanted to meet her. And she didn't like it here and she went back to Europe. She didn't want to stay here after my grandmother sponsored her here. And she married very well. She married a man that had a store. And she did okay. She had 2 sons. And I remember after the war they needed clothes and stuff. My mother sending shoes even because they couldn't buy shoes. It was so poor there, you know, and clothes and books for he's an aeronautical engineer and he needed books. And I remember Uncle Nick and him getting together and buying books that he needed to send out there. Whatever, I don't know. They must have been Slovak because I don't know what they would do with English books. But anyway, I did get to see that family. She was as pretty as, even though she was elderly already, she was beautiful, as pretty as I can remember her when I was a little girl looking in the albums, family albums. I think she was just beautiful. Other than that, I didn't get to meet any other family, which was sort of disappointing. I thought that I'd see more of my mother. Of course, my mother didn't have anybody either. She just had that sister that died here very young. And a couple of relatives that came from there are here. I mean, the families are here, but they're not close relatives at all. So,
No, that's perfect timing almost because there's only about a minute left on this
got another
tape.
question? You didn't even get your questions in.
Well, no, I have a lot of questions, but I don't. I think that might be a good point to end without starting on a new arc.
What's the new arc?
I don't know, like, you know.
Meeting Grandpa.
Yeah, meeting Grandpa, dating in high school, and.
Oh, I knew Grandpa from early years. And I had my eye on him early. And I remember, I'll tell you this story, I remember going to visit the Churchill relative in John's City that lived across this corner crosswise from John. house. And my mother would pack me up with candy because they had a lot of kids to give to the kids when I got there. And I would go sometimes and stay overnight with them. And that was a big trip, you know, go to Johnson City overnight. And I told my cousin, Margaret, if she got him to come out and play, I'd give her candy. And she went over there and she was very bold. And she said, you better come out here and play because I come out. She won't give me any candy if you don't come out and play. So when I came home, a few days later, my mother poked me in the back. She says, and since the young ladies go asking boys to come out and play. So, yeah, and I used to meet him at that Suckles.
Oh, okay.
And he went to that too.
Mhm.
And he was like the kid that everybody knew in that group, and all the old people knew him, and they'd treat him. You know, like, where'd you put the phone? Over here?
Uh-oh, I'll get it for you.
I bet
It's
it's your
alright,
mother.
it's timed out
Yeah,
anyway.
it's probably.
Yeah.
Here you go, Grandma.
Oh. Hello? Hello? Uh-oh. What
No.
happened?
I guess I didn't.
Well, let's call her. I bet it's her.
Call Grandma, or Mom.
Yeah.
What is it?
7911.
You must have done something wrong.
Hello, are you trying to call us? No? Oh, somebody called and we didn't get the answer to the phone because we moved it for the filming here or whatever.